himself, but to even be able to print the book.
So I'm curious on your interpretation of the Galileo trial. I think it's universally agreed today that the verdict was a mistake, that this is somebody seeking to expand our knowledge of the cosmos, and he was punished for it. Who do you believe is at fault here? Is it the church? And if so, what were they at fault for? Was Galileo, could he perhaps have been more delicate in how he presented his Simplicio character? How do you interpret it?
So again, you have a number of questions.
Yeah. Sorry, it's my method. Sorry.
Same question. So my position is the following. You see, seen from today, okay, there is no question that Galileo should not have been convicted in the following sense. Not because he was right in what he said about the science. Seen from today, let's suppose that his model, the heliocentric model, was completely wrong. Still, the church did not have the right to actually punish Galileo. I mean, today we would say he is right to have whatever opinion he has on scientific matters. The church cannot impose on him what he should think scientifically. So that in that respect, there is no question that the church was wrong. With our perspective of today, yes? I mean, even if you were completely wrong, his model was completely not valid, what right did they have to say, oh, as a result of this, we put you in jail? Or as a result of this, we burn at the stake Giordano Bruno, and so on, okay? So I don't think there is much question about that. Now, was Galileo somewhat of a pain? He was. No question about that either. Yes, I mean, he could not accept that, his intellectual freedom would be somehow restricted. And like I said, he was actually, all people at that time, they were religious people. He was a sincere believer, but he thought the Bible is for our salvation, not to teach us science. So we have to do the science and go where the science takes us. Now, he was also a very, very proud person. He didn't like people to disagree with him. That is certainly the case. And in principle, he would have done himself a great favor by never writing this book, the dialogue, or never publishing it, not publishing this book. But he just was not the kind of person who could do that. He absolutely had to publish this book. And yes, he tried, by adding the preface, the conclusion, and so on, to make it sound softer. But it was not something that he truly believed in. He believed in what he wrote in the rest of the book. So he could have made his fate easier, but by relinquishing, what he regarded as sacred, which was basically intellectual freedom.
My audience is very interested in the Middle Ages, and I've touched on a lot of points of it and tried to show that there are clearly negative things about it, Inquisition trials and other matters, but I think we're a little bit too hard on it. For example, the Inquisition, many of the trials had to do with Protestant Catholic divisions and not superstition in the Middle Ages. And this whole matter gets to the issue of science, and we're not in the Middle Ages at this period. We're out of the Middle Ages, but the church still has incredible power. So my question is, how do you think people are misinterpreting the Galileo affair? I mean, you mentioned that it wasn't a simple religion and science issue, but it's more than that. So how do you think they're misinterpreting it?
Well, I think that they are misinterpreting it exactly by seeing it as a conflict between religion and science. Mm-hmm. You see, I wrote a whole chapter in the book at the end about, the religion of Albert Einstein, compared it to Galileo, and about religion in science in general. And the statement is the following, and I believe that Galileo thought in the same way already 400 years ago, but certainly we should think about this today, which is the following. As long as one understands that Scripture is this incredible book which has in it, so much wisdom and so much, it's poetry and philosophy and whatnot, but it's not a science book. It is not a science book. It was written in a way that everybody should understand. It was not written as a science book. And as long as you don't try to take literal interpretations of scripture and force them onto science which is determined by observations, experiments, and reasoning, yes, then there is really no conflict between the two. And there can be no conflict between the two. I know many, many scientists who are also religious people, Jewish, Christians, and so on. And they don't see any conflict between their religion or faith and the science which they do. The conflict only arises when people interpret things wrongly. When people suggest, for example, you mentioned Darwinism earlier in our conversation. When somebody suggests that creationism should be taught side by side with Darwinism in a science class, that is wrong. You can teach what Scripture says about, the way the world was formed. And I think people in the 21st century can understand that that is a metaphorical description of the awe that people felt when faced with this seemingly incomprehensible universe. Yes? Mm-hmm. But you cannot take a certain phrase from the Bible and try to impose that on scientific observations. And that was never the intent. Mm-hmm. So as long as you don't do that, there really is no conflict. That is my point here.
Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors. I'm a historian of the 19th century, and this discussion of religion, the conflict thesis of religion and science, it starts in the 19th century, as you said, or looking at holy books and looking for empirical data, which happens amongst Christians and Jews and also Muslims with the Quran. And then to try to project that back to earlier centuries runs into problems. So I'm curious, after the Galileo trial, after his house imprisonment, is there a chilling effect on other scientists in Europe in the years and decades to follow?
Oh, absolutely. There is, I cite in the book actually a letter that René Descartes wrote. This is the great philosopher, the French philosopher René Descartes, who was also a mathematician. I think, therefore I am. That's Descartes, yes. He writes a letter to a fellow mathematician, and he says, I asked about Galileo's book because I heard that it was published in Italy, he said, and then I heard that the book was prohibited and Galileo was arrested and so on. My first reaction was that I wanted to burn all my books. But later I decided, well, at least I would not publish them right now, and so on. So there definitely was a chilling effect, yes, for a while at least.
Well, I'm curious now, for you as a scientist, what do you think are the 21st century implications of the Galileo story? We live in a very different world, and if a scientist releases data that conflict with a scriptural interpretation, that's not a problem today. But 5 centuries ago, that was a problem that a scientist had to be aware of. So I believe there are other implications. So what do you see are the implications?
You're right. I mean, we actually are encountering science denial today almost as much as during Galileo's time, although not always because of religious reasons, yes? I'll just give you very few simple examples. And the most important one is the one we're currently living in, which is the COVID-19. You see, we are living in a very difficult period, yes? Right now, you're talking to me, I'm sheltering in place at my home. I imagine you are doing the same.
Yes.
But I want to remind you that, sadly, already still in March, I'm not talking even about, December, January, I'm talking in March, and I'm saying this without there is no politics involved in what I'm saying. There is just my feeling as a scientist, okay? I'm not trying to involve any politics here, but you look in March, and our president said that there are now 15 cases in the US. You may have seen that briefing where he said that. There are now 15 cases, and very soon it is going to be 0. And this is when already the scientists were saying, no, if you don't take immediate steps, it's going to be horrible. And there are countries that took the science very seriously from day one. I mean, the best example is South Korea. What they have done is very simple. First of all, they instituted mass testing from the beginning, huge amounts of testing. Then they actually instituted tracking the people who are infected and isolating them, and then using technology to trace people and see with whom they are in contact. And as a result of this, if you look at the statistics of South Korea and how that developed, first of all, they are way, way beyond the peak. And the numbers that they have now is, you look, they have 4 new cases a day, 3 new cases a day, things like that. The US in March, he was still saying, it's nothing. This was a complete denial of what the scientists were saying. Now, this was not for religious reasons. So, don't misunderstand me. I'm not paralleling this with religious reasons. It was for various political reasons, other reasons, I don't know what. We are running in an election year, all kinds of things, yes? But there was a science denial. I'll give you another example, climate change. Climate change, as I'm sure you know, about 97% of the scientists of the world now agreed that, well, not only that there is climate change is actually 100% of the scientists agree. 97% agrees that humans play a bad role in this, okay? And it is enough, to look at simply the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, and you will be convinced that humans have a role in this. But suppose you even are not 100% convinced that humans had a role in this. But surely humans did not help the situation. And yet the US left the Paris Accord. Do you know how many countries are not in the Paris Accord? 3. You know what are the other one? Syria is another one that is not in the Paris Accord. This is the company in which the US is. Okay? So there is science denial today that we see. And like I said, even though it is not for religious reasons, it's for political conservatism, reasons that have to do with finances, all kinds of other reasons and so on, there is still a trend that we are seeing today to deny scientific facts. So my real message from all of this is follow the science, believe the science. Scientists can be wrong. It's not that they are always right. They can be wrong. Absolutely, they can be wrong. However, science also has this nice habit of self-correcting. Sometimes it takes not too long to self-correct. Sometimes it may take a century to self-correct, but it does self-correct. Truth comes out at the end. So follow the science. And whatever your reasons are, and the thing is the following, you see, it is never a good idea to bet against the science. But when life on Earth is at stake here, as it is in the case of, let's say, a pandemic or in the case of climate change, it is absolutely insane not to follow the science. And I'm saying this, like I said, I'm not trying to blame anybody, not from this party or that party or I don't know what. This is a general statement. Follow the science.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack, and I like stories of the past that we can link to contemporary events, and this fit right within it. So the book is Galileo and the Science Deniers. Dr. Livio, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. And by the way, the book is out on May 5th.
All right. So that is all for the episode today. Once again, I want to start things off by thanking the Spy Masters of History Unplugged. I'll explain what that is in a second. Our Spy Masters include Bill Ivey,